built a close relationship the last couple of years. I have a lot of respect and high regard for Ron and what he's done over the years. 20 plus years as an OPP and
Toronto and Peel.
Toronto.
Yeah, I worked in this area as
well. I'm sure he'll do his own intro very quickly. But you guys all asked for experts. I think they got sick and tired of the last 4 or 5 weeks just listening to me.
Yeah.
So now we're going to start bringing other people to come in who can add value into your life. Again, this enrichment program is to elevate all of you. And like Brother Ron was saying, and I've told all of you guys are in social services. You need to be engaged. You want to get that job, sky's the limit. If you want to be quiet for the rest of your life, this is the life you're going to have. Easy, but not exciting. Okay? And then you're going to be wondering why people are making $120,000 in social services role as a director, and you're still making $35,000, $40,000. Right? But we have Ron here for an hour. Please don't be afraid. There's no stupid questions. If you're thinking about that question, chances are other people are thinking the same thing, but you had the courage to ask that. Okay? Ron wouldn't be Ron if he didn't ask those questions and grow in the police force. And now he's running for the political party of the Conservative Party for the Oakville North Burlington area. Okay? I highly respect this individual. We need more leaders like him in this country. If we have more of them, and hopefully those are you guys in the future, this country is a better place. Ron, over to you.
Thanks, Steph. I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
All right.
I'll give you a 5 to 10 minute background on myself and how I got here, because it is, when I look back, I can't believe it's me, but it is how it started. So my parents immigrated to Canada in 1970. Been here a long time. My dad was part of the Indian military, fought in Kashmir. My dad has no education. After grade 10, he left school, lied about his age, joined the military. My dad comes from extreme poverty. My dad comes from a pind or a village in India called Namashe. And when he had left, his family had no money. He had left. He was in the military. My mom comes from Amritsar, and she was highly educated. Her dad was a doctor. And my parents back then were not an arranged marriage. They were a love marriage. So obviously those from India would understand you have one family that's highly educated. And then my dad, who has no education, no family, poor, meets my mom. They fall in love, and they end up coming to Canada. And the family was not in agreement with that at the time. We come to Canada. My dad wears a turban. Right? So we came into Canada. I'm the youngest of 4 kids. When they came here, there was a lot of racism, very different than today. The racism that they talk about today, it's in your face, but it's minor compared to what it was back then. All right. I should say, let me correct that. It's not in your face. It's subtle. So automatically when something doesn't go your way, some people fall into the mentality, it must be racism. Not always the case. All right. It's a much more educated and aware society that we live in here. Back then, I remember growing up, people would openly call my dad Packy. They'd call him a terrorist. They'd call him all these different names. And then for me growing up here, people don't know if I'm black or brown or Spanish or Latino. So I get everything. And I'm okay with that. It's just whatever. I actually preferred the way it was back then. Only reason being is you knew the idiots up front. Right? If somebody called you something racist, you knew, oh, this person's an idiot, and you just moved on. And everybody knew who the idiots were. Now it's so hidden because it's not acceptable that people are going to do things you're never going to know. The reason I bring that up is to say, look, don't use that as anything to hold you back, because it's doing you no favors. Or you need to kind of overcome it and just move forward. So my parents go through all that. Growing up, my parents were very strict with us. All of us kids turned out to be relatively well educated. We ended up doing okay. Now that wasn't because things were perfect. They were absolutely not perfect. In grade 3, my parents went bankrupt, which means they lost everything. So for 7 years with 4 kids, we were renting houses all over Brampton. And I grew up in some really rough areas at that time, but my parents were still focused on trying to keep us as safe and protected as possible. So I started working at the age of 14. I probably have had 35 jobs in my career before I became a police officer. But what happens is I get to high school, really didn't know what I wanted to do. I always liked fitness. I always liked sports. I had a coach who was a police officer who said, maybe you should be a cop when you get older. I think you'd be okay. I went to university. I studied in kinesiology and health science at York University. I got kicked out of school 2 years in, and my grades just sucked. It wasn't because I was stupid. I just was not interested in what I was studying. And I had a lot of personal things going on, so the two just didn't match. I was disinterested at school. I was a little lost in my personal life. Things weren't going the best. And then I flunked out of school. I got kicked out. I spent a year working And then I got hired by the Toronto Police Service. I got hired by Toronto Police. I worked there for 15 years. When I was working in Toronto Police, I actually worked in this neighborhood, this area here. I've been around this area quite a bit. But in the course of my policing career over 15 years, I had worked in like a frontline police officer wearing a uniform. I'd worked as an investigator in what's called the Criminal Investigative Bureau. I'd worked in community units. I'd coached teams. I'd created teams like kids teams. I'd worked in our headquarters and what's called the Divisional Policing Support Unit and the Community Mobilization Unit, where I managed programs all throughout the city. And then I worked in our Major Crime Vice Unit, which is like drugs and robberies. And then I spent 6 years at the Gun and Gang Task Force. So I worked in guns and gangs for 6 years in Toronto, going after the worst of the worst. In those 6 years, I created Toronto's largest gang exit strategy. So let me explain to you what that is. In 2017, the chief of police at the time had said, you know what, we're going out, we're arresting these really bad people every day. Gang members, murderers, human traffickers, pimps, you name it, we're getting them. And we're getting them with a lot of drugs and a lot of guns and a lot of bullets. Very dangerous. We were arresting the same people over and over again. So the chief had known my background with community work because I'd been volunteering since I was 16. I've been volunteering a long time. I still volunteer to this day. And he'd known my background in community stuff and said, look, would you be interested in trying to figure out how we can do this? I said, yeah, sure, let's do it. And over the course of 4 years, we developed the program. And initially, the idea was we just want to get gang members and get them out of the gang lifestyle. But over 4 years, that changed. The initial idea was really simple. I mean, for you here, if I were to ask you, how do you take somebody who's a criminal and how do you change them to make them a not criminal? What would you do? What would you say? It's tough, right? People will say one thing, get them a job. And they think that's the solution. But I have to ask you, when you have a 15-year-old kid who decides to pick up a gun and shoot somebody and deal drugs, do you think the problem is as simple as them not being able to have a job? It starts at zero. It starts at zero for these kids because they don't come up in great families. They don't do well in school for a wide variety of reasons. Then their friends are not the best friends that you can have because they're not looking out for them. In fact, they're just kids just like them. And then other people that are older, both older gang members and human traffickers, will identify these kids because they say, that's just like me. I was just like that. So they pick them out really quick and then they bring them in because these kids have no positive adult role models. And then all of a sudden they start giving them money. They start getting involved. And for these kids, they get brainwashed. And some of them realistically have no other skills than this, or at least that's what they believe. And their criminal record is so long that they're not even what's called bondable, which means that they can't work in certain industries because you have a criminal record. I mean, you can't have a criminal record with fraud and work in a bank. It doesn't make sense. It's for public safety. And then when they get out to the real world, they've been incarcerated many times. All of their friends are criminals. They come from broken homes. They have no economic employability because they have no education. They're not good with book smarts. And now they're 18. And when they're 18, all of a sudden school disappears. And when you think about what routine is in their life, every day they have a routine. Wake up, go to school, come home. During the school, they're with their friends. They don't go to any classes, all right? Or some of the classes they go to, it's because they like the teacher, but they still cause a problem. And then at night, they deal drugs and they do whatever. All of a sudden, you remove school. Now school is done. They're 18. Okay, they're out of school. Now they have to fill in that structure for the day. There's nothing and nobody there. And then things get very bad. That's when you start seeing the murderers, the human traffickers, because now they have to make a profession out of being a criminal. Now they have to be a professional drug dealer, professional human trafficker, professional gun trafficker. All of a sudden they become hitmen and hit women. They start killing. It becomes very bad. So you have to deal with all these issues. Well, it worked for us. We had over 1,000 people participate in the program over 4 years. 750 of them were males under the age of 21, being 75%. Out of that 75%, 75% of that group had previous convictions for having a gun, for being a drug dealer, and for doing a shooting. So we had the worst of the worst that when we gave them an opportunity to say, do you want to change your life? They said yes, which was so contrary to what they would teach you in school. Okay, we were embedded into a couple of universities to learn from them, but also to share back what we're learning. And I can tell you, there's a big difference between the real world and what you read in books. Okay, for example, the best example I give is somebody can teach you to be an accountant, but are they an accountant? What's the difference? right? The difference is, yeah, I'll teach you how to do this job. One of the questions is, have you done this job? Because when you do things, it's very different. So we started to notice a disconnect. What happened for me was, as I was doing this, or I should say 750 were male, the other 250 were females that were involved in human trafficking under the age of 21. So there were girls that were being sold for sex by a pimp. And we had some girls as young as 13. They participated in that program. And it's terrible. Now, during the course of doing this, I learned a lot, and I became a national expert in what I do. So I became an expert in creating this program. I provided it to countries in Europe, in the Caribbean, in the United States, in Canada. We've given it all over the world to say, this is how we did it. And then one of the other things we added on is these are the type of people you need to do the program. Because I can give you the program and say, this is how you actually do this, and this is how you find people to bring in. But all of it is relying on people. I can give you the program, but if I have the wrong people, it doesn't matter. It's going to sink it because you don't have the right people in there. So really, it's about finding the right skill set. Well, when I was doing all of that, behind the scenes, I was advocating to government, to municipal, being like the city government, to the province of Ontario, and then to the Canadian government on improving 5 things, because we had 5 things that we knew were common among all of these issues. Number one was I wanted to improve the family structure in homes. Okay, between the ages of 0 to 6, your family really sets your guide for who you become. And you start to build things that, look, there's something that happens in our brain between 0 to 6. And I want you to think for yourself. All right, what are the things that give you anxiety, make you nervous, things you're uncomfortable with? You might not remember, but when we're growing from 0 to 6, we're not building skills in our head to necessarily succeed. What we're doing is we're unconsciously collecting things for us in order to survive. Okay, you have this Neanderthal brain when you're that young. So you're looking around and you're collecting data without knowing it to be like, how do I need to behave to survive? Look, if you have a little baby, and they're walking down the stairs, what do we all do? We grab the kid, don't go there. All right, and then you talk to the kid and you say, no. Sometimes you give them a little slap on the butt. You say, don't go there. What you're doing is you're teaching that kid how to survive. You're not educating them on, hey, you're going to fall down these stairs and crack your head and you're going to die. You're saying, don't go because this is dangerous. That's the whole brain for kids. So when you look at these unhealthy people that you might have in your life, or even you, and you think about, hey man, why does this person behave a certain way or respond to certain things? That's the beginning. And then if they don't have positive adult role models or a healthy relationship, or their parents, they're one parent beats the other parent up, they're very abusive at home. To this kid, that's how the world operates. That's how they believe things. Their brain actually makes these connections that says, this is normal. Even though parts of it are like, no, this is not normal, they still think this is normal. So that's your family. So I started advocating the government to say, look, we need to reevaluate what family looks like, and we should be encouraging healthy family environments. Also connecting families to communities, whether it's religious, faith-based, but making strong communities. Because if your personal family's not healthy, you have other families. Right? I was talking to somebody yesterday, they came to Canada, they're Catholic, and as soon as they came from the other side of the world. As soon as they came, they said they went to the church because they have no family here. That's their family now. Right? You can do things like that. For anybody else, you can go to like a gurdwara or a mandir or a mosque, and you're part of a family. That's what it is. We need to encourage that. Outside of that, it became school, right? I won't ask you to say it here, but one of the things that was the most surprising to me out of the many things was the number of kids that I had come across that have been designated as having a learning disability at a young age. So they get to school, teacher says, look, this kid can't read, can't write, they can't pay attention, they must have ADHD or a learning disability, and then you get a label. And that label's a real thing, right? It is a real thing. Like imagine for you here, who has, just by raising hands, who wants to stay in Canada, become a citizen, right? So it's a good. Now imagine, and this is the power of labels. Imagine, you put your hand up, right? Imagine you did this, and this is one of the problems I see here is, imagine you make that goal, you become a Canadian citizen, but no matter what, we always call you an Indian. The label. You can never break that. You're a Canadian citizen, something bad happens to you, and they don't say something bad happened to a Canadian, they say something bad happened to an Indian. Right? We don't have that here. Now, it's important to break away from labels. The reason I bring up the learning disability is the number of those kids, and this happened over time, that came to me or that I worked with and said, I have a learning disability, I can't read and I can't write. the number of those kids that have never had an eye exam was almost 100%. Why is that important? It's not that they're stupid. They could never read the words on a page. So where is their connection to school? You're talking as young as grade 2, grade 3 in Canada, being, 8, 9, 10. Their parents are not educated enough to take my kid to an eye exam. So the teachers give them a label. The teachers don't know any better. It's not their fault. They're trying to do their best. They go to the doctor. Doctor says they got a learning disability. How do they give the learning disability test? It's a questionnaire. Right? That's what it is. And now all of a sudden you get this label. There's a kid I had worked with. He graduated high school, couldn't read and write. How crazy is that? Right? So we knew school was something we needed to strengthen. And then outside of that, it was your peer groups. It's your friends. Because these kids who come from broken homes, these kids who can't read or write, these kids who are not academically inclined, do you think they become friends with the smartest kids in the classroom that come from the best families? No. They become friends with other kids like them because they're like, oh, that's me. We speak the same language. Because after school, there's no parent around, so they're out playing by themselves. So that becomes their friend. Now they have a whole group of people, right? 5 or 10 or 15 people that they're all the exact same. And then they go out and they play. And now their world becomes that because they're all like, look, the rest of the world we don't connect with. This world is not designed for us, but our world, we all understand each other. This is our world. This is where we want to play. And then you have some people that are on in between both, and they say, well, I like this side a little more. It's a little bit more fun. And they get involved. And then outside of that, it becomes you as an individual. So you got your family, your education, your peer groups, and then you as an individual. Now, what are we doing to promote like individual development here? Because by the time you're 15 or 16, you kind of can already tell the pathway somebody's going to go. Now, it's not always set in stone, but I'm sure you could probably tell for yourself at 15 or 16, you're like, okay, here's where I kind of want to go. It doesn't have to be specific, but you know the direction you want to go. But for a lot of these people, they don't have a direction, and everybody knows. I had in one scenario, we had in a school in the east end of Toronto, one kid in a school kills another kid, shoots and kills him after school at the parking lot. I go to the school to talk to the teachers. The teachers were very upset for a couple reasons. One, they both knew the victim and they both knew the shooter. So the teachers taught both. So they were conflicted emotionally. And the thing that came to light was when I ultimately spoken to all the teachers that had taught the kid who killed the other kid, they all said, not surprised. That's dangerous because this was predictable behavior. So all of them said, not surprised. And my follow-up question was, well, like, who did you tell about this? What do you mean not surprised? Oh, well, we heard they made threats. They were violent before. They were getting involved. They were failing all the grades. Their guilt was that they had known this potentially and it came to light, but they'd never told anybody. So we needed some changes on that. And then the last part is community. So family, school, your peer group, you as an individual. And the last one is community. Is how strong does the government create an infrastructure to promote healthy behaviors, but also economic development, right? So for those of you, how many people here are living in Toronto? How many people are living in Brampton? The majority are in Brampton. So I grew up in Brampton, right? So that's my neighborhood there. Now, Brampton it's not the same as when I grew up there now. It's very different. But there's pockets in Toronto, not far from here, 5 minutes from here, where there's been historical poverty for 50 years. Okay, 50 years. And when you have historical poverty, you also have high crime. The two are connected. The poorer a place is, the more crime that there is. It's just the way things are. There's a wide variety of reasons. When you don't have safety, you don't have economy. Because if you weren't safe to come here today, let's say if you were to leave your house to come here today, and the risk of you leaving is you're going to get robbed, you're going to get shot, you're going to get killed, your house is going to get broken into, your family's going to get hurt. Would you ever leave your house? Probably not. And if you don't leave your house, you can't participate in the economic market. You can't go to a store and buy things. You can't show up to volunteer. You can't go to a work and earn money. It just kills economy. And in the back end, crime rises because crime is an economy. So your choice is, do I go this side and become a criminal, or do I go this side and continue to be fearful for my life? Or do I participate? Do I pay the criminal organizations to protect me? Do I pay them to give me money? Do I do? And that's what happens. But the government doesn't do any sort of effective intervention into these things. No, because if you look at it, some of the highest crime areas, like I said, are the poorest. Like, does anybody here drink Starbucks? I didn't think so. All right. I like using Starbucks. You drink Starbucks, yes. Oh, you're so rich. No, listen, the reason why I bring up Starbucks is my example, and I will say this to big corporations and the big government when I'm advocating for investing into these communities is this. Let's say, is anybody here familiar with Jane and Finch? Yeah, thanks. So Jane and Finch is a neighborhood in Toronto. It's about 10 minutes from here. It's in Canada. It's considered one of the most violent communities. Anywhere you go in Canada, for Canadians, Jane and Finch is one of the worst off spots in the world. All right, sorry, in Canada, I should say. Historical gang violence, a lot of shootings, a lot of murders. I worked in the area. I can tell you that the whole Northwest Toronto is a pocket for violent crime. Okay? The people who commit the crimes live here. People who are the victims of the crime live here. It's the same place. Not everybody in this neighborhood is a criminal. They're actually hostages to the gangs and the organized crime. And none of them want it except for the gang members, right? Because there's, again, money to be made there, and there's a lot of violence on the west end of the city. The reason I use Starbucks is I go to corporations, I go to cities, I go to governments, and I use Jane and Finch as an example because Canadians understand it. People who've been here for a long time get it. And I say, I want you to go to Jane and Finch, and I want you to find me a Starbucks. And everybody kind of was like, well, there is none there. So that's exactly the point. The point is, if you don't have a Starbucks in a place like Jane and Finch, you should ask, well, why don't we have it? And people say, well, it's a poor business model. Because the cost of a Starbucks, which is probably why people don't drink Starbucks, it's why would I pay $4 for a drink that I can get for $1.50 or $2? And really, to me, I'm not a coffee connoisseur. It doesn't make a difference to me. I don't care. I don't care what my coffee tastes like as long as it's not terrible. But when you don't have a community that can afford the product that you're selling and you don't build a business there, well, the reason I use Starbucks is because Starbucks actually pays their employees pretty good. Starbucks also has benefits. They also pay for your education. They're an international organization. They're a whole group that you can work your way up. You can be an HR manager in Starbucks. You can start off as a barista and work your way up to eventually, being a potential owner of a Starbucks, or at least getting to an effective corporate place where you're making a lot of money. Now, if we don't have those economic opportunities in those communities, well, then what are we doing? We're just lying to people, because people show up to those events or to those schools and say, you could be a doctor, you could be a lawyer, you could be an astronaut. But most people that live in poverty, when they get outside of their door, they never leave 5 kilometers of where they live. That's their whole world. Now, when they get out, they don't see employment. They don't see banks. They don't see any of that stuff. They just see okay, there's a jerk chicken place there. There's a convenience store there. There's this is my world. These are my opportunities. So we kind of sell them dreams that they haven't physically seen. And until you can physically see it, it becomes very difficult. I mean, for those that came to Canada, did you come to Canada before at any point, or was it your first visit? Did your parents ever come? Nothing. Wow, that's incredible. Right, so you came, right? So they had an idea, kind of, okay, this is where you're going to... No, oh, they did? Okay, good. So you have that visit. So you're here. You're exploring. You're figuring this place out. You're learning as you go. You're on your own, for the most part. You have each other. But you're all at the same stage. You're all exploring and learning at the same time. You really don't have, besides maybe Navi and some other people here, people to say, hey, listen, here's the history behind the place. Here's how you interact. Here's how you're happening with these guys and girls involved in these terrible lifestyles. Then I'd go work with the legal system, judges, lawyers, defense lawyers. Then I'd work with educators. I'd work with, poverty experts, economic experts. You work with city planners. And then over the course of those 4 years, 3 levels of government, but additionally, what are the commonalities between healthy places and unhealthy places? And there's a bunch of data that can help drive that. But I leave, Peel Police says, look, why don't you come here and do what you did there in Toronto? We'd love to have it here because Brampton crime has gone up, Mississauga crime has gone up. We'd like to have this inroads because we're arresting the same people. And Brampton is very unique, and so is Mississauga. They're 2 completely different cities. They just share a region. So I came over here, and I was policing in Mississauga Lakeshore. And COVID happened, obviously, when I was in Toronto. And who was here for COVID? Was anybody here for the whole COVID thing? You were here for it? How was it for you? Well, listen, you're not the only one, right? So he said the world collapsed for him because you were stuck. Like, imagine coming to another country, which you have done, and then all of a sudden you get locked in your bedroom. Dude, it sucks. You're by yourself. You're alone. Significant mental health impacts for a lot of people. So as I was back on the street, I saw a couple things start to increase. Suicides went through the roof. Domestic violence went through the roof. Child sexual assault went through the roof. Organized crime had evolved. Now we're seeing a massive amount of car thefts. You're seeing people making money when they were told there is no economic opportunity for you. Then I started watching the news because that was the only time even though I was politically very connected and very involved, I never cared for politics. Yeah, I didn't. Is that they're alone. They feel like nobody is going to believe them. They feel like nobody's ever experienced this. They feel like nobody's going to help them. So they suffer in silence. That's where the term comes from. They don't ever tell anybody. Well, what I remind people is you are not alone. These crimes happen to a lot of people. There's a lot of people who continue to suffer in silence. And if there's any part of you that wants to step out of there and break it out, don't do it for you, you do it for them. That's the mentality to have. I say this to people all the time. I say, people I've helped out in the past as a police officer that have been victims similar to that. They've been a victim of abuse or rape or sexual assault, and they're hesitant to come forward. So they call the police, or a friend will call the police because they tell a friend, this is what happened to me. I don't know what to do. And a friend says, you should call the police. And their experience with the police, whatever country they come from, is very different than what it is here. But they don't know that. So we're not like any other police service in the world here. We're very professional. We're very fair. We don't ever judge the victims of crimes. We investigate. We will treat victims of crime accordingly depending on the crime. There's a whole bunch of medical issues we have to go through sometimes and some other stuff that happens there. But when I have these victims and we know something has happened to them and they're hesitant to tell us, so we're interviewing them at their house because a friend called. This happened to my friend, and we'll knock on the door to do what's called a well-being check. Well-being check is to make sure you're okay. And if I were to come there and talk to you and I could tell you're not okay and you don't want to say anything, we have this weird thing in us where we would rather suffer to not make anybody else's life difficult. That's just in us. I don't know why. I would rather suffer not to bother anybody else. So even now with my wife, she's like, you got to ask people for help. And I'm like, no, I'll just do it myself. Because I don't want to bother anybody. And that's not me looking for help because anything bad has happened to me. It's I need help to achieve some goals. That's different. But for these victims, it's crazy. I always put them in a different shoe. And I said, okay, imagine what happened to you, happened to your best friend. What would you say? What would you tell them to do? Would you tell them, hey, don't say anything? You don't want to bother anybody? What's the advice you would give to them? If your best friend came to you right now and said, listen, I've been raped, I've been sexually assaulted, I'm involved in human trafficking, I don't know what to do, I want you to tell me now, what advice would you give them? Go to the police. Get help, right? That's the right advice. If you are in those shoes, what do you tell yourself to do? The same. Perfect. You got strong, you got courage in that. But that's not the same for everybody. A lot of people would be like, shut up about it. Don't say anything. My family's going to be embarrassed. I'm going to be embarrassed. I don't want to put anybody through this. All that stuff. The idea is, when you do noble things, the reason they're noble is because they serve a bigger purpose. I always try to remind people that there's other people like you and they suffer in silence and they need a champion. They need somebody to stand up for themselves. And there's nothing more empowering than having somebody who's been a victim of something so terrible stand up for everybody else and say, I never want this to happen to anybody else, just like you mentioned. And now you know about it. They have a website. They got a documentary on it. And it's very powerful. It's the story of that because they know this is happening so much in all parts of the world and nobody's talking about it. And we need people to talk about it. So if you feel like you're in that position, all right, that's the side of you I want to bring out as best as possible. Look, Indians, we're naturally passionate. We believe in justice. We really do. We'll fight for justice. We'll ignore you for 30 years because of ketchup on a pakora. All right, we're committed when we think about something. That commitment has to be brought to the forefront, especially when it comes down to an injustice, especially when it comes to stand up against it, because the longer you do that, not only is it for somebody else who might be in the same position, but how many other people did this person do this to? That's why when you see a press release from the police, and we do these press conferences and we have somebody who's a sexual predator or a rapist, the reason we put their picture and their name out to the public is because we're looking for more victims. Because we're aware that 90%, roughly speaking, of victims never talk about it. And we're trying to encourage them to come forward to say, hey, we've arrested this person for violent sex assault. We believe there to be more victims. We want you to know we got them. We want you to know somebody was brave enough to tell us about them. Now we need you to feel comfortable coming to us because we need to make sure that this person is held accountable for all the nonsense and the crime that they did. And the only way we can actually have justice served is for the victims to come out and do it. So for you, it's about finding that bravery and that courage to tell somebody. If you don't have the courage yourself, which is fine, and courage isn't the word, I'm talking about the health in that moment to do it. Make sure you tell a friend, knowing that your friend is going to give you the advice that you need to hear. Call the police. I promise you here, your experience with the police when you're a victim of anything like that, it's not what you expect. It's very catered to you. Yes? Listen, I wish I had a magic answer for you, right? That's something like, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking? 19. Look, I love my parents. Okay, I do. And I think parents are critical, and I'm a parent myself, and I love my kids. Right? I could tell you, times change and things change. I can't give you specific advice to that because I'm not here to break up your family or I don't know your family environment. I don't know your parents. I don't know what any of that. I'm not you. I haven't lived your life for 19 years. I could just tell you now that parents are always coming from a good place. Always. Okay, I will never give my kids advice that is not good for them. Now, does that mean my advice is always right? No. It's going to change because I don't understand the world that they live in. Now, my parents' advice to me now as a parent is very different. Right? I don't really ask them for advice because they never really gave me the best advice. But my advice I'm giving to my parents is really good. Yes, Michelle.
Your point, Ron, is one part of understanding critical. What Ron you just mentioned, and I would like to just clarify that to you. Very deep, very deep in a sense. Are you the person to think part of the cost change? Do you want to make sure? When we talk about, I just was Ron you was explaining right away thought came to me to culturally and medically appropriate groceries at Sai Dham. Why don't we do jello?
Yeah.
Why don't we follow the same thing? What is the reason? Maybe we are from the same ethnicity, same background, same country, same town, same village, same area we live in. Do we eat the same thing? I've talked about it many times to all of you. Reason I'm just saying this is we're very grateful and thankful we have somebody in between who's coaching us, but remember one thing. Somebody has to hold a button. Somebody has to. The times are tough at night, and it's going to be, we all know what's happening. If you think there's a change to come, are you a change? That's the key.
Yeah. I mean, I'll ask you, what advice would you give your kid in your situation? Okay, so and that's the advice you give yourself. That's the whole point of stepping out of your advice and imagine you gone to somebody that you respect and you love, and you put yourself in there and say, well, what do I say to my kids? So I think you've answered your own question. I think that's the part is I can't give you the answer, but I want you to answer it. And that's why when you say, well, what advice would I give to somebody if I was in that shoes? A lot of the kids I deal with, they've never had anybody there who actually gave them good advice. The advice was majority selfish. I'm not saying your parents are. What I'm saying is some gang member, some human trafficker said, yeah, you should do this. It's good for you. It's not good for you. It's good for them. It's very clear. It's very evident. But when you have somebody that says, hey, man, I'm going to give you advice as if you were me and I was you. Here's what I would do. I think in us, we all know what's right and wrong. In us, we all see things. And regardless of, we all know, I think there's a guiding principle that says, hey, man, this doesn't feel good. Like, I shouldn't do this. And I think listening to that is very important versus getting in your head and saying, well, what are the impacts of this? Look, I'm a big believer in kind of that energy without getting too spiritual. It's like there is something talking to me saying, hey, go here. And initially your hesitancy is you're afraid. Yeah, well, what happens if I go there? But generally speaking, the things that I'm most proud of are the times that I listened to that. Because I knew it cost me something. And it's always going to cost you something. Nothing is free. Have you guys heard of the zero-sum universe? So zero-sum universe is, and I do believe in this, is imagine the world, the universe was a mathematical equation. It starts at zero. All right. And if you believe in it, there was a big bang and the numbers expand. So they're in the positives. Well, as everything expands, opposites can't exist without each other. At some point, it's going to contract in on itself. And as these equations grow to positives, they become negatives. And over the course of time, it comes back to zero, which means that everything that's done in this universe will always come back to zero. It's a zero sum. So for every cost that you have in making a decision, at some point and in some time, unless there's a terrible tragedy, which is still part of the zero sum, it's going to come back to you. It's just, are you willing to deal with and manage the rough times ahead potentially in a decision that you made with the intention of the outcome being something you believe in? That's where people really don't want to do it. They want everything, but they want to give nothing. You have to give to get. So part of that decision for you, if that were to happen, is to say, okay, I'm going to upset my parents. I'm going to maybe cause some shame for them, but this is important to me and I know this is the right thing to do because this is nothing I want my kids to go through. So as Vishalji has mentioned, it's breaking that cycle and saying, okay, for the future generation, we always have to innovate. Hold on to culture. Culture is so important because it's who we are. But you have to innovate with the times or you're left out. Imagine your parents said, I don't ever want you having a cell phone. Good luck. Good luck. Good luck.
Start your own organization. Similar with voice. I was talking to one of the officers on a payroll when they talk young kids from 13 to 19. They court has given them some kind of a punishment on what act they have done. I was studying that and I came across that youngsters today, it's not that all of them are bad. It's not that. 13, 14, 15 to 18, 19, basically a company also. Most of them have different challenges in the family, but otherwise, it is basically a friend to a friend. Oh, my four friends, let's go and pick up some stuff from the store. Okay, let's go. Let's go and do it for the let's go. We get carried away with that and we don't realize that the steps we are taking, if you are that very moment, there's an officer is notified that there's 4 people who will be coming for this supply, delivery or pickup, the carrier is done. Irrespective if you did something or not, you were part of it. And similarly on the other side, coming back to you guys, is that if you take a voice today, you can have a voice on an anonymous page. You can help other girls. You can help other boys. It's you. We all carry the same light and spirit. All of us. It's no different. The current shortage of funds and money is always going to be part of life, whether you are billionaire or you have nothing in your pocket. But we think and believe the reason Ronnie came, the taking of his time, doesn't live around. Just for all of you. That you have an example of somebody who we look forward to see. We need leaders like this in the community who can be a guiding tool. But if you don't learn from a guiding tool, what should success be? To an example saying the family compressed, yes, family compressed. Do you think you'll be able to give the same courage to your child? No, you won't. You may push your child, do, but you will not have the same strength because you never shown your strength. If you have not taken a step today, how will you take it tomorrow? I'm not saying that. Understand your part, your will, your willingness. Enlighten yourself with your own life. You have everything inside you. Rest all our commodities in a different fashion and relationship of life is just temporary. Your own self has the power to get connected only when you put your efforts into it. And you put your time into it. And you make a decision what is right or wrong. Once you decide what path you want to take, it's you. You like it, go with it. You don't like it.
I will end off on this because it is one of the things I brought up on the weekend, to that mentoring session. I think it's an important question. It's a pointed question because as Vishalji was mentioning, it's forcing you to make a decision and commit to it in a weird way. One of the questions I asked, and the 8 questions I asked these kids in the mentoring session was, personal and professional life 0 to 10. My follow-up question to that is, what do you want? What do you want? And I ask that question even now in business, when I'm doing business development, or I meet people, or even in politics, when I have to go meet community groups. Within the first 2 minutes, my question is, what do you want? I try not to ask it so aggressively and so assertively, but I'm going to ask it to you here. The reason I'm asking for that is we just need to get over the uncomfortableness and the clouds of the conversation, and let's get to the point here of what do you want? And I always ask people, especially younger people like yourself, what do you want? And when I ask that, I'm not looking for, I want to be loved and respected. No. I need to know, what do you want? In that particular case for the mentoring, it was, what job title do you want? And what company do you want to work for? Like, give it to me. And eventually you pull it out of people. The reason why that's so important is it's similar to like journaling and writing out and putting it into real life is, unless I know, like as a mentor or anything like that, unless I know what you want, I have no idea what to do with you or where to guide you or where to put it into. I have no idea. I need information from you because I'm not going to magically know. I have a staff of 50 underneath me. All right. I don't have the time, unfortunately, to sit with all of them and figure this out. So my one-on-ones with them are very short, but they're very much, what do you want? Like, in terms of not what do you want from me, like, what do you want for you? Because I need to know. So if I have a staff member and they sit down with me and I say, what do you want? So I want to take this course. Like, what I'm looking for them is to say, I want to be a senior developer. So I need to learn more about these coding languages and I want these courses. I go, perfect. Check, check, check. I go back and I say, okay, go find out what you need to do to get these courses. Go bring them back to me. They go back, skin in the game. They do that work. I don't do that work for them. They come back and say, this is what I think I need. Great. I look at the cost. Now I fight for them. Then I go to the founders and say, hey, they told me what they wanted. This is what they need to do. I think this is a good idea. And then they say, okay. And then boom, you're on your way. So I'll ask you here, anybody who knows, like, well, I know when a barber there, are you showing off, making fun of me, but I get it. But for you, I'd want to know, what do you want? Job title, goal, like what's the actual title or company? I want to have my own business. Doing what? I want to clean windows. Like, what is it? Does anybody know what they want? Yes, sir. Want to be a police officer. Okay, where do you want to be a police officer? Do you know what it? Do you know the requirements? You need to be PR, yeah, PR. Yeah. Have you done all that stuff, or are you in the middle of doing it? Oh yeah, okay, perfect. So then, what's stopping you from becoming a police officer right now? Yeah, okay, perfect. This is where it's important to write it out, right? You know what you need to do. If you said, I want to be a police officer, if we meet in a year from now and I ask you, what have you done to get that goal? And you're like, well, I'm still thinking about it. I'm going to be like, okay, when you're done these things, then call me. That's like, I don't mean putting you on the spot. My point is, that's the example I want to give to everybody. It's like, okay, okay, so you want to be a police officer. Okay, who else had their hand up? Yes. Hmm. Power. So you want to establish a profession, stable income to be able to pursue. Wow. And what are you working right now anywhere? Or? Oh. Yep. And are you guys students here? So limited 20 hours a week of work? Is that what it is? And then volunteering. So have you thought about getting a job in the industry that you want to get into? Yeah. Are you blogging or have anything on Substack? Oh yeah, okay. So you're going to be there. I have no question. You're already there. You're good. You're good. Yeah, she's fine. Invest in her stock now. All right. So put some money. That's a good investment to be in. What about yourself? Oh, restaurant. What type of food? Mexican food. No, no, I know, I know. What type? Yeah. Okay. So that's great. So anybody else have an idea? Yes. Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Yeah. What I like about that is you're putting action into it. You're already doing this stuff. For a lot of people, they haven't decided what they want. A lot of people, they haven't got into it. Like if you had told me, yeah, I want to write a book, but I haven't done anything about it yet. I'm going to wait till I get a job. Then I'd be like, man, you got a problem. Like, because you haven't taken the steps, but you've already done the steps into there. Quickly to end off, I'll tell you just a similar story. Yes. Yeah, yeah, I understand. I understand. Mhm. No, listen, that's not true. Women are not prioritized here for that. When it comes out of domestic violence, why it's so serious, look, for police to lay a charge on domestic violence, there has to be some evidence. Some evidence. So it doesn't matter who calls. If a woman calls in and says, my husband beat me up or my boyfriend beat me up in that particular case, police would show up and we have to do a preliminary investigation, right? That preliminary investigation, there has to be some evidence that what this person said is true. Okay, so whenever you're receiving information from somebody, I'm assuming it's the guy in this one here that says, look, I got charged and they had no evidence against me, to be critical of that information because they're never going to tell you, yeah, I punched her and she had a black eye. We wouldn't pursue that charge unless there was something there. Yep. So when the girl says, I did wrong, what did she do wrong? Okay, so she lied about it? Did she say I lied? Okay, so that will come out in court. But at the very beginning and the onset of there, if there's any evidence, look, that evidence could be anything, all right? But if there's enough evidence, we have to arrest people here in Canada for domestic violence because domestic violence all across the world is responsible for like 40 to 50% of homicides. When people think about murders, they think about it's gang members. It's not always gang members. It's a lot of times it's spouses, husband and wife. The law is so serious, and in Peel region in particular, it's a significant problem because of our community culture and practices. They don't talk about it because you're going to bring shame to the family. All right. The problem is when you have people that are that bad. Now, your friend, if she said she lied about it, that's a terrible thing to do. Number one, that's not okay because there's real repercussions. That's the other thing I'll caution you about. Don't weaponize the police here. All right, because it's terrible. Because look at the problems that if your friend who said, "Look, I lied about this. Now I regret it because I've seen what's happened to this guy." Look, if there's any allegations and any evidence of physical violence in a relationship, domestic violence in Peel region is not only considered between two people that are dating, regardless of their sex, it's also within your family. Okay, if a husband, or sorry, if a dad beats a kid, it's considered a domestic violence in Peel region. There's a long history behind it. It's because, unfortunately, there's been killings among family members here based off of things like, for example, the daughter was dating somebody that the dad didn't approve of and they murdered the daughter. So the entire reason we have this process in place is to protect people from dying. So while your friend honestly did a piece of garbage move, if that's true, if she lied about it, that's an unethical person who tried to weaponize something. Your friend here, I'd strongly consider even being friends with her. And I'll tell you why, because that's a personal, moral, and ethical thing that they did. That's not right with real repercussions. So when they said they prioritize, you have somebody saying, I lied about things. Now, we don't know if she made up evidence, if she said things, but when there's certain things that are said and done, The police are going to do what the police are going to do, which is to prevent people from potentially dying. So the other guy got arrested, and it's unfortunate that he has to go through this system now. But during the court process, that's what will come out. So you can get charged. I can charge you, but it doesn't mean you're convicted. So I can charge you and say it's alleged that you did this, which is what it is. It's an allegation. So now, in the meantime, we have to separate the two. So they're put on bail to say to him, you can't be around her until this court is done. When it goes to court, a judge has to say guilty. Now it's a big deal. But if she lies and there's holes, it'll come out. Now, is he inconvenienced in the whole process? Yeah. But that's not the police's fault. Whose fault is it? 100%. It's about taking accountability and responsibility. If you have friends that are like that, I'd strongly, number one, suggest, hey, be cautious of them. Because if they're willing to do that to somebody that they love, imagine what they're willing to do to you out of their benefit. Okay, that's a personal, moral, and ethical thing. And if you know this about this girl and she screws you, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Of course. Well, look, if I, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, listen, I would say on the flip side, you're like, yeah, this poor guy, and I agree with it. But let's say she was telling the truth. How do you decipher who's telling the truth or who's telling the not? Imagine you'd called police and I show up and you say, this person's been beating me up for 10 years and you have a mark on your face. And I walk away and I said, well, I can't believe you. But that's crazy. That's criminal. We have the reason why the police here are so progressive and so forthcoming is because we're mindful of what's actually happening. Like we pay attention to culture. You know, police officers are very culturally aware. We know the difference between, you know, an Arab Muslim and a Pakistani Muslim. We understand that some Muslims are Punjabi. You know, a lot of people don't get that. Even people in my own neighborhood don't get it. Police officers were highly educated and trained on cultural differences, even if how people communicate. So, for example, First Nations people, they take their time to say things. They think about everything that they say if it's an elder person, right? And they don't maintain eye contact. Reason being isn't because they're disrespectful and they're slow. No, it's part of their culture of respect, and they want to think about what they're saying before they say it. They're very careful with the words because they're very thoughtful, number one. So if I didn't get trained in that and I was dealing with somebody, there's a potential that I might think, man, this guy's not looking at me, he's not listening to me, he's not answering me. It could escalate. But because we're so educated and trained on that, we know, hey, listen, this is part of their culture. We'll wait, it's fine. Okay? So we are trained on that. So that's where policing is very different in Canada. So if you call and you're living in Peel, trust me, the cops in Peel they probably know, you know, Punjabi food better than we do. They probably know, you know, Hindi movies better than like it's very ingrained in the culture. So it's a mix, but you have to understand that the decisions that we make are based off of somebody calling us, but us also ensuring that we're aware of what cultural things might be important. You know, sometimes I'll tell you, for a Punjabi mom in her 50s to call the police to say my husband is beating me up, that's not the first time that's happened. That is the time that she thinks this is the time he's going to kill me. That's what happens. If we don't take that serious, this is a disservice to the community that we have sworn an oath to protect, regardless of how anybody else feels around it that's not involved. Too bad, so sad. This is the way it's going to go. Because we need to protect that person, but we're also highly aware that in the culture, that the time that they make that phone call is their thought is, he is going to kill me today. This is the time. Hey, he's beat me up 20 times before. This time I'm not coming back. I don't know what else to do. So it's important to be cognizant of the big picture. Yeah, we have individual things that happen that might not be right, but globally, look about all the lives we save and what we're here for. So it's very important to understand what is the purpose of public service. What do we fulfill? Are we going to make everybody happy? No. But I am happy that for that woman that day, we kept her alive. Any other questions for me? Or?
I guess that, so at the other side of Sai Dham, we've been involved in family cases of police And we also attend with police, helping families in the country. And specifically in your case, when she talks about boyfriend being charged, I have to understand something has happened right away. The officer, when they comes in, they try to listen to number one. First thing is to diffuse the situation is what is happening. Diffusing situation is important. Thirdly, if a girl comes up and says, because we had a case where the girl walked out of the home. She said, my in-laws are troubling me to death and I cannot stay. It was just 2 years, not 2 months, not even 2 months of marriage. 6 years of relationship, 1.5, 2 months of marriage. She said, they don't let me do this, they don't let me. She walked into the police station, called the officers. Right away, she was taken to the shelter. We went through with that whole case for 6 years with her. We tried everything possible to settle that down. We do a lot of counseling on the other side, besides that. There have been cases where police was invited that have been abused, or family members said this, officers came in, fortunately I was there, standing with them, and gave all situations. Most of the time, when police officers comes, you have to understand one thing, very, very, very important. Diffusing situation is one part. The facts you must have. You know, you talked about just about journal, right? Making a note of yourself on a day-to-day basis. That is an evidence of what you have written in 6 months back, and a year back, or 2 back. You follow a protocol to make notes of it. She's telling right and wrong today, we don't know. Maybe relationship was very good, but there were certain facts that prompted her to call police. When the officers came, they charged him, there has to be something at that moment of time, whether she created or not. Your confidence, unfortunate situations happen, I'm not saying it didn't happen. Your confidence is important. And we have gone through a lot of cases in the last 2 years. Not as an officer, but as a community. If you are confident, you are true. We have very varied cases, my children. A boyfriend, girlfriend came as a student, a wonderful family, we met their father, mother, of the boy's family. Girl used to be a good rap model. Guy's father is a famous singer in India. They all came. They were living somewhere. I attended all of them. Very wonderfully done, and all of a sudden they had a fight. Slowly, gradually became abusive. To an extent, the girl's front 2 teeth were broken. Now her whole career gone, jeopardized. But if she would have taken a step day one, they would have not landed there. She would have woken up from first time. She would have not ended up. Give the opportunity to leave. You did not wake up. You did not realize that you become bad to worse tomorrow. You did not take a step today to change your future tomorrow. Ron also said a very beautiful thing, and this is what we talk about. You choose ones whom you want to be with. For whatever reason you like to come with. For whatever reason. You decide that. It's your career, your future. All of us are just very partial. Your parents, your family, your brothers, your sisters, they are there, but they are not in your shoes. Your shoes size is different than your parents and your family. You don't wear, or they don't wear your size of shoes, or you don't wear their size of shoes. Everybody has a different shoe size. Be careful.
You remind me of one last story I'll tell you before I go, but one of the worst domestic violence situations I've ever seen was an Indian family in Mississauga. Neighbors called in the middle of the day. They said there's a woman in a Saudi screaming for help, and her husband had grabbed her by the hair and dragged her in the house. Multiple neighbors called in. I get down there's no answer at the door. I kick in the front door. The house is covered in blood. Pools of blood all over the place. The guy comes downstairs, he's got blood all over him too, puts his hands up, says nothing happened. I arrest him. Eventually I get the wife in. She's missing a chunk of her forehead. It's gone. She's holding a baby in her hand, a little girl. And she says to me, nothing happened, everything's okay. She's wearing a white sari, it's covered in blood. I had to threaten her pretty much that I'm going to arrest her under the Mental Health Act because she's incapable of carrying it for herself. Because she's going to bleed out, she's going to die from the wound that she had. She was refusing medical treatment at the risk of dying to prevent her abusive husband, who multiple people had seen, who had taken a chunk out of her forehead, and while she's holding her baby, and her baby's a little girl. Eventually, she ends up coming in, she ends up going to the hospital, we separate the baby, gets charged, as he should get charged. There's so much evidence. The house is covered in blood, it's got pockets of blood clots. Now this goes to court, and she doesn't show up. She refuses to cooperate. Why? Because she doesn't want to break up the family. You're young, but I'll share something with you that I realized as being a father, is that you're not young forever. And as young as you are, and you're seeking mentorship and guidance, you are mentorship and guidance to other people. Now, my biggest fear out of that is that one day he kills her, obviously. And then the second fear is that her daughter is going to grow up, and her understanding of a healthy relationship is getting abused by her husband to the point that police are called. And when you have kids and you have people that look up to you and you're acting as a mentor, you have to lead by example. I noticed that with my kids. So how I set my kids up for their life now is I need to demonstrate a healthy relationship between my wife and I to them. So that as my daughter gets older and she starts to find somebody, she says, this is how a relationship should be. So I'm very mindful of how I speak to my wife. We're very mindful of how we disagree, because we're setting the tone for the people looking up to us to how are things supposed to be. Now, if you're in an abusive relationship and you have a child, and I understand there's a bunch of things to take into consideration, be mindful of the impact you're having on that person. And I worry for the future for that kid. Not only growing up without a mom, but potentially growing up and getting into another cycle of domestic violence on here. And that has to break at some point. So that being said, man, I thank you guys for your time. I know it's been a long time, but if you have any questions, by all means, you could ask me. If not, I'm around. If you're on Instagram, I'm on there as well. So, you want to take a picture, or what do you want to do? Oh, yeah. Does anybody have any questions for me, or?
Before we close the custody case.
Yeah. yeah.
Guys, before anything else, do you think somebody like Ron G should be a leader tomorrow? Just to give you this, from such a busy schedule of his work, and he's standing for a member of parliament from Oakville, the request to come and try. I don't know how to thank him, because thank you will be a small word. When you're challenging and fighting against so much odds, you still have a love for the future of Canada, to devote your time and experience. How many people do you find like that? In the car, struggling, standing, business, and loved by the leaders. The beauty that I heard from the leaders, that they wanted. That was the beauty. I've never heard that. I've seen people going along the supreme leaders behind. I've never heard a supreme leader saying, we need to help Ron bring it. That was so beautiful. I really watched that. Just to mention this, I just want to say to all of you, whatever you've learned from Ron today, I just want to feel one thing. Just my part of it. If you feel you learned something today, your Instagram, your Twitter, your Facebook, whatever words of thank you want to put it on your social media, just thanking him, that's all. I don't want nothing. Whatever you think is well. You can tag him on the social media, but if you feel it is worth your time, if you feel worth you learned something today, you felt it is worth sharing with your friends and family, if you feel that. No binding, no pressure, no compulsion. That's the least honor and respect we can give to a person who has come all the way to give you safety and security for tomorrow. And this is what you feel, you should do it. And really pray, and I would request Ron G also, that if you think we can do anything to help, you want us to go door to door, knock, create anything, happy to do it.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your
And
time.
we will be more than happy to come up and make it, because we don't find people like that. We don't. We are bringing up some more financial, public ICSC bank coming in for your financial literacy. I've requested MPP Amarjot Sandhuji for next Friday morning session with him as an international student, how he became an MPP, his journey sharing with you. Talking a few more things for you to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I will comment under the Sai Dham Instagram I'll comment on there if you want to see my Instagram handle, and then if you want to follow back, by all means, follow me back. Let me know.
Please.
Thank you.
Please. Thank you all of you.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
I would see you